In this video we're going to be looking at 7 words connected with history. And here are the 7 words: archive, artifact, excavate, heritage, primitive, millennium and renaissance. So here's your first word: archive. Archive. An archive is a collection of historical documents and historical records, and also it's the place where the collections are stored. So it's kind of like a library, but it's also a word connected with the collection in the building. So here are some example sentences. The archives of the museum are filled with interesting documents and artifacts. We now have an online archive of records which can be accessed by the public. The city archives contain birth, marriage and death certificates. So you can have an archive of something, such as an archive of documents. You can have a digital archive if the archive is on a computer or the internet, and you can have a vast archive if it's really big. It's both a verb and a noun, so the archive is the collection or the building, but you can also use it as a verb. So you have archives, archiving and archived. And the person who looks after the archive is an archivist. Archivist. So archive, archivist. And some synonyms for archive: well, collection, library, repository, and records office. And something you often find in an archive are artifacts. Artifacts. So artifacts are objects such as tools or weapons or jewellery or ornaments, basically things made by human beings that are interesting to us for historical reasons and cultural reasons. You can spell it either with an E in the middle or an I. They're both correct. Here's some example sentences now. The museum holds more than 1,000 artifacts from ancient Rome. He was an illegal trader in ancient artifacts. It was a priceless historical artifact. And some common collocations: historical artifact, cultural artifact, a priceless artifact, and somebody often collects artifacts. And of course, it's a noun, to artifacts. And some synonyms for artifact: antique, heirloom. An heirloom is usually passed down a family through the generations from father to son or mother to daughter. Relic. And here's your next word: excavate. Excavate. When archaeologists excavate a piece of land, they dig in the ground and they remove the earth and they look for things in the ground, things like old pots, bones, buildings, artifacts. So for example, a new expedition is again excavating the site of the ancient Viking settlement. Archaeologists excavated the skeletal remains of an early human in Indonesia. They excavated the site of a dried-up river and found many interesting artifacts. So you can excavate a site. You can excavate a grave if you're looking for skeletons. You can excavate the remains of things. Excavate a skeleton. And it's a verb, so excavates, excavating, excavated. And an excavation is the thing when the archaeologists are digging in the ground, and it's an excavation. It's the process again of excavating something. And some synonyms: dig, uncover, unearth. Here's your next word, heritage. Heritage. A country's heritage is basically all the qualities and traditions or the features of a country or a culture that have been passed on over the centuries from generation to generation. So the things that we should look after and preserve for future generations. It tells us about the past. So here you've got the Sphinx and the pyramids in Egypt. So this is part of Egypt's heritage. So it tells us about the past of Egypt, for example. Historic buildings are part of our unique heritage. The concert celebrates the rich heritage of Russian folk music. It is important to protect our heritage for future generations. So you can have a cultural heritage or a historical heritage. You can have a heritage site, so often ancient towns or medieval towns, very old towns, are heritage sites. And you can preserve the heritage of a country or of a city. And some synonyms: culture. Customs and traditions are similar words too. Legacy, history, possibly ancestry as well, although there's a slight difference between those two words. And primitive is your next word. Primitive means something belonging to a society in which people live in a very, very simple, very basic way, usually without any industry or without a writing system or without any technology. So they live a primitive lifestyle. A primitive could be people that lived maybe thousands of years ago, but there are still primitive societies today, which simply means they don't have much technology, writing. So his book is a study of the primitive societies of the Pacific Islands. He has studied the health of many primitive tribes of Central America. So you can have a primitive tribe or a primitive tribesman. You can have a primitive society, a primitive culture. And some synonyms for primitive: basic, undeveloped, backward, sometimes backward. Millennium is your next word. Millennium. This is a period of 1,000 years. So, for example, from the year 1000 to the year 2000 was a millennium. So, for example, many Japanese companies are unsure whether they will survive the new millennium. There were parties all over the world as people celebrated the new millennium. So you can celebrate the millennium, approach the millennium, so that's the years going up towards, say, the year 2000 or the year 1000. You can have a new millennium, and we live now in the third millennium, according to the Western calendar. So millennium, the plural of millennium is millennia, although a lot of people still say millenniums, but millennia is the correct plural form. Not really many synonyms for millennium. 1,000 years is the only one. And finally, Renaissance. Renaissance. This was a period in Europe, and especially in Italy, between the 14th and the 16th centuries, when there was renewed interest in art and literature, in science and in learning. And it was really inspired by the ideas of ancient Greece and ancient Rome. And here you can see some Renaissance statues and paintings. So the word Renaissance is used to denote a particular period in European history, although is often used more generally to talk about a rebirth, a renewal of something. So you can view many great Renaissance masterpieces in the art gallery, science took a new and different turn during the Renaissance. Renaissance art is typified by a particular style of painting. So you can have Renaissance art, a Renaissance masterpiece, Renaissance architecture, Renaissance studies. So there are your 7 words then: archive, artifact, excavate, heritage, primitive, millennium, and Renaissance.